Hoyoverse definitely knew what they were doing when they placed two excellent supports side by side in the same patch as well. In 1.1, some say we are having Silverwolf as well as Luocha alongside each other, and these two are amazing characters. If you're just here for a summary, bottom line is both of them are excellent supports, but what we really want to find out is when is perhaps Luocha outperforming Silverwolf, as well as when is Silverwolf outperforming Luocha, and who would I recommend in what specific situation for different people. Throughout the majority of this video, I'm going to be very impartial and totally no bias in terms of the front part, and towards the very end, I'll give you my bias as well. And note that it's very difficult for a content creator to actually decide between these two, because it's so difficult when you have two excellent supports that do totally different things from each other as well. But I will be putting my foot down. I believe in committing to an answer, and we will see whether this ages well in a couple of weeks or months time. Now, the first things first, ideally, the ideal situation is we could pull both, but some of us might be waiting for Blade or Kafka that's coming out as well. So let's go ahead in the first thing. Let's talk about current value. What are the value of these two characters right now as the current game state a lot of us are in? Depending on when you started the game, perhaps you're now maybe just pushing Memory of Chaos, or maybe you're getting towards pushing Memory of Chaos as well. There is a current value in terms of this situation. I think right now, in terms of both of them, they both have different values, and let me explain. Luocha is excellent for people, for example, without Bailu. You don't have a second healer in the team, or maybe you don't have Japat, or you don't have either one of these, and you only are left with Natasha as an option. In this situation, I think Luocha's presence is insanely much higher, and his value definitely goes up if you don't have a second healer or tank. A lot of you might have realized or seen from a lot of content floating around as well, people that are pushing towards the end of the Memory of Chaos usually have either one Bailu or Japat, or some of them even have both. So that is the situation. I think that's where he comes out on top. And for example, if you don't have Welt as well, that's where his imaginary uniqueness does stand out quite a bit as well, in terms of being the only second 5-star to have imaginary element in his kit. He does a good amount of imaginary damage from his ultimate, so it definitely is relevant to his kit as well. Other than that, Silverwolf, current value. A lot of us are only maybe having one primary DPS, say maybe you pulled Jingyuan, or maybe you put Zealer as well. In this sense, Silverwolf, what she offers, she adds value to both of your primary DPS very well. She gives you the ability to implant weaknesses into the enemy, either of Lightning or Silverwolf or Zealer's Quantum, running a double Quantum team. Very effective at dropping weaknesses onto the enemy, and especially in the current game state when there's not really too much effect resistance going around for the enemies, she possibly even could become a sub DPS damage dealer, adding more damage to your already very strong team. In terms of current value of if I would just cast a broad net, speaking generally, I think Silverwolf comes out on top, even if you don't have a secondary huge tank like for example Bailu or Japat. And here's the reason for that. In the early game, a lot of us are struggling because we are pushing content right now under level into the Memory of Chaos. But once all of your characters are, for example, level 80, you will come to realize that actually you can do with just Natasha as a primary healer, and maybe in your second half you just run two defensive units like Fire MC and March 7. That works pretty fine as well, especially if you're fighting the enemies that are under level than you. So one thing to know is that right now these two characters, Bailu as well as Japat, have a slight higher value because you're fighting content that you should not otherwise be able to clear because you're significantly under leveled. So it makes sense why defensive characters generally outperform in situations where you are under leveled. So this is my rationale. I think Silverwolf ages slightly ahead as well. Now in the second category I want to talk about is really the choice of alternatives. Now we talked briefly about alternatives already when we were mentioning them, but I think one thing to point out right now is that between the two of them, Silverwolf does have much less alternatives, but I think alternatives aside, Luocha is something that it should not be slept on even if you have a character like Bailu and Natasha. Let's talk about the harder one first, shall we? I do like to eat the vegetables on my plate before I get to the meat. Sorry for any vegans out there as well. So if you have Luocha if you are having him in your mind, and you say that maybe you already have Bailu, you already have Natasha, do you really need Luocha? My direct answer first is in the near future, I don't think so, but that doesn't mean he's useless for your account as well. Luocha is the most offensive healer out of the three of them. And what he offers is also a form of healing that is not only an emergency heal where he heals one unit in his skill when they drop below a certain health, he has a cleanse as well, he has a AoE dispel on the enemy with his ultimate ability, but not only that, he also has a very interesting way of healing where he sets up this field around, and when your characters are attacking as well, they get a sort of sustain based on his kit. What this means is that Clara also has a sort of quote-unquote lifesteal because it doesn't scale off with her attack, but more of Luocha's attributes as well. So that's why I say it's like something like lifesteal. This is very good, especially in a more offensive team comp that you want to push through damage. So he's an offensive geared healer. This is going to be very relevant later on when you realize that you need damage coming from all 4 of your slots. The problem with Bailu as well as Natasha is by and large they are fulfilling more of a defensive role and don't add additional damage coming from your 4th slot, for example. What this means is the pressure lies on the first 3 slots. Luocha alleviates a lot of this burden and makes that 4th slot much more versatile as well, and also contributing to overall damage, dispelling enemies, cleansing, and also providing a good amount of sustain for a team. So I think in the later game as you go along, his value will increase, especially when opponents are getting much harder. His kit is very well versed in terms of being able to sustain any little bit of tweaks that the game might offer as well. And the biggest part, I think that Luocha beats out these two is that he scales with attack. Why is this significant? If you think about the best characters in the game right now, for example Asta as well as Tingyun, these two are characters that scale off with attack, and Luocha can benefit from them. He benefits just by being in an Asta team because Asta speed buff the whole team, attack buff the entire team as well, and Luocha does benefit quite a bit of that, giving him more damage, and his healing also scales with attack. So tremendous amount of value when you are already synergizing very well with very cheap 4-star meta supports. So that is one thing to consider. Other than that, if you're talking about other than his role as a healer, alternatives for imaginary characters are very few. You have Welt right now, and perhaps maybe some characters they'll be releasing, maybe Yukong as well in terms of imaginary, but by and large he's the only other 5-star imaginary character right now that does AoE in terms of imaginary damage. So that is something very important to consider. But out of the 2 of them right now, I would say that in uniqueness, Silverwolf is far more unique, and the reason for that is no other character in the game currently, even any nihility character, is able to drop weaknesses onto enemies. So for those of you who don't know, basically she has in her skill ability to implant a weakness in the enemy based on your team composition. So a team of like full quantum, when she uses her skill, the enemy, if it's applied, will always have that quantum weakness applied onto them as well. This is insanely valuable because for those of you who don't know, I'll put up a chart on screen and all the boss weaknesses. Not all of us, or some of us might be struggling because we don't have certain elemental typings fighting certain elemental bosses. And if you guys want to see like more details on this chart, go check out hsrguide.com as well. I put all my statistics and all my database there so you guys can check it out as and when you want and when you have free time too. So basically, what Silverwolf does is she compresses the amount of characters that you need to build and reduces the weaknesses by simply implanting your strengths into the enemy. Of course, the big caveat is it has to be implanted, and for now, in the current game state, they do have pretty low effect resistance, and even when they do have higher effect resistance, of course, she's able to build effect hit rate as well to ensure that she's able to plant her weakness debuff. This makes her super good in terms of value for the overall count. Alternatives, there are none. She also defense breaks in her kit as well, and does quantum damage, which if you see a single target quantum damage. And in terms of that aspect as well, defense break, your only other option maybe is the light cone. I think his resolution shines as Pulse of Sweat, but that's only a barely, maybe a 12% defense break light cone for nihility characters. She can also use that to add even more defense break to her kit. Other than that, Pella is a 4-star, but of course Pella does offer AoE defense break. If you are looking for defense break, I think Pella offers significantly much more potential in that aspect, but definitely Silverwolf does offer good amounts of defense break, and also is more single target in nature. But for the sense that she only drops it, she's the only character that can drop weakness. Very, very unique in the kit, and very few quantum characters. Not as few as Luocha though, but I still think in that sense, if I were to give it to them, I would say Silverwolf comes out on top in terms of current game state alternatives. But as mentioned, Luocha is not weak by any means in this aspect. And next up, I think this is probably the most important part of the entire video, and the one that is, you guys will kind of know, this is the one that I actually will rank to determine which character is going to be better. And I think it's about potential. Right now, if you were to talk about as of time of recording in 1.0, somewhere in 1.0, I think that Silver Wolf will offer a lot more investment value in terms of current value to any account right now, except for players who have many characters. And that is where Luocha's point comes in. I think the thing about Silver Wolf that not many people are thinking of is her strongest benefit to an account is resource efficiency. But a lot of people, like some of you who are watching this video, are planning to play a pool for multiple characters every patch. If you, for example, already have Jingyuan, Zealer, you're planning to pool for Blade, Kafka, both of these characters and stuff like that, and moving forward you're going to pull more characters than you're not. Maybe you're a working class adult, as a lot of you are in my analytics as well, I noticed. Then in that sense, Silver Wolf does not scale very well with investment in terms of financial resources as well as number of characters. Why is that? When you implant weaknesses, what you're implying is you want to play a mono team, or you do not have resources to build a large roster to tackle the enemy content. But some of you, perhaps you have a lot of characters right now, you have both Jingyuan and Zealer, you will actually feel that the current content is not too challenging, and the reason for that is because every patch that comes, the whole patch will be geared towards the banner characters that they are trying to sell. If you can afford the banner characters and you're not skipping, by and large you will not face much difficulty in that current patch. What this means is Silver Wolf is a hedge for patches that you can't pull, or maybe you are skipping for longer periods of time, or maybe you're a free-to-play player and you don't have that much resources to keep pulling for characters. In that sense, Silver Wolf will see much better investment value if you are pure free-to-play players. You want to save up for very long droughts, and maybe you want to E6 a character at one go and skip like maybe 7 patches. That sense, Silver Wolf is better. But when you have many characters, her value diminishes very quickly. And this is coming from a personal experience of a player who has tried beta testers, and they gave every single character, and I just didn't find any team composition that I wanted to play Silver Wolf in. The reason for that is, would you rather play a damage buffer like Tingyun and Estart, or Silver Wolf in the same slot? And because your last slot likely is going to be a sustained character as well, and you want 2 other specialist damage dealers to deal a ton of damage. She does deal okay damage, but if you don't even need her requirement of dropping the weakness, you will likely want to clear the round even faster with higher ceiling cap DPSs. So that is something very important to consider for Silver Wolf that a lot of people are not factoring in. By and large, majority of people are free to play or small spenders. I think Silver Wolf will offer a ton of value, but note as we stretch toward the game, she gets a little bit weaker as and when we get every single new character that comes as well. I also talk about some other issues that I want to test before she goes live in another video I already put out on the channel. Do check it out if you're interested in like more intricacies, but let's talk real quick about the potential of Luocha. But now let's talk real quick about Luocha. Luocha's potential is not very easy to see at first glance. If you have Bailu and you have Natasha or even Japat, his value at currently might not seem like a super important pool. But one thing to remember is that Luocha is actually a character that scales with problems that the game throws at you. He's able to cleanse debuffs in his skill, and he also procs passively as well. And when he moves faster, means that he has more ability to heal without even the need of skill points, because it's a passive healing based on and it goes on cooldown, like based on his turns. So he passively heals someone if they drop below 50% life. For example, he works very well with Blade. You can see in the Blade Luocha video I did already to understand how his kit works, or you can just search out HSR guide to read it up more in detail. But that's how he works, and he also has an AoE dispel with his ultimate ability, and not only does it dispel, but he also deals damage to that whole enemy in terms of imaginary break damage. So a very strong character with very good amounts of flexibility in his kit. He scales with attack, meaning that he doesn't even need to build attack percentage because he can get it from supports in the game as well, and he can just build, if you need to, effect resistance on your healer, so he doesn't get disabled, and he's able to cleanse very quickly. Out of the two of them, if you're talking about dollar value that you're throwing into the game, and this way it's become like free to play, if you can just move forward. But if you are interested, this character scales extremely well with Eidolons. Out of the two of them, and possibly one of the best E6ers in the game all the way there, Luocha scales very well with Eidolon investment. And if you are planning to pull Eidolons of characters, I think Luocha is a very attractive option. And out of the two of them, and maybe out of the 4 characters we have in the game, I think he's the one that will probably remain relevant for the longest period of time, especially with Eidolon, many Eidolons in his kit as well. a good amounts of utility throughout the patches. If they decide to increase enemy resistance, he is able to cleanse. If they decide to improve, for example, their ability to debuff, he scales nicely with effect resistance. He has heal in it in terms of a passive aspect, so if there's silence and stuff, maybe it might still work if the fails up. Who knows? Anything that I can think of that game developers in other turn-based games like to throw at you, he more or less will be able to fulfill, unless of course Hoyoverse does the unthinkable and something unique, which is possible, but I think he's a really solid. Just to nerf a healer, maybe not. So those are some thoughts in terms of potential. And last but not least, I think I want to talk about free-to-play kit. Who works better free-to-play? Out of the two of them, if you are pure free-to-play, as talked about briefly already, Silverwolf does come ahead. Her kit works much better if your free-to-play characters don't have too much resources. I don't think no one out of their right mind would not recommend you to pull for Silverwolf if you're free-to-play. She just is so much more efficient because she compresses the amount of elements that you need for the game to be much more simpler as well. You can run mono elemental teams, very strong amounts of single target damage as well. Luocha, in terms of his free-to-play, he is nice to have. It works very well free-to-play, but his scaling with investment definitely does set the bar difference in terms of how you would feel as a free-to-play player or maybe a player with a little bit more spending. If you do not have Bailu or Japart, of course his value does increase tremendously as well, especially if you're fighting stuff under level. In terms of free-to-play kit, they diverge depending on what you need. If you have Bailu and Japart, I would say Silverwolf edges out slightly higher in terms of what you need right now. If you don't have Bailu and Japart and you're really interested in clearing content and maybe you're not planning to skip for long patches, you might pull like the next patch, maybe Kafka or Blade, I think Luocha would definitely be a better out of these two in this category as well. And now let's talk about my personal bias. So I'll remove this right here and I'll make this logo slightly bigger so that for those of you who are just like listening in, you know that this is a bias section. Honestly, I think one of the hardest things to do in this patch is for a creator to put his foot down and choose between both of them. Both of them, I'll just put a disclaimer, they're both very solid characters. They will add value to most accounts that I can see. If you are a whale, the choice is clear. Like Luocha will significantly outperform Silverwolf if you spend money in the game, or you have plan to get many characters, or you are super lucky free to play. Luocha will outperform very significantly compared to Silverwolf for the fact we mentioned that she's really focused around her ability to improve resource efficiency. If I were to describe an analogy between them, Silverwolf is like sandpaper. She works very well solving a lot of problems, but the more you utilize her kit as time goes by, the sandpaper does wear off and the effectiveness does decrease over time. On the other hand, Luocha, if I were to give an analogy, is like a Swiss Army knife. You can use him for a lot of situations and he will always add value in some way or another. If you want to use him for damage like a knife, not the best chopper in the world, but still will get the job done as well if you need to cut a fish or something like that. Pretty solid as well. If you were free to play, here's where the trickier part comes in. I think in the short term, if you want to pull a character, I guess I would recommend Silverwolf over Luocha if you're a free-to-play character and or free-to-play player. And the reason for that is, don't forget, reruns always happen, and I assume that Luocha's rerun will probably be a couple of patches. If his rerun is like in 2 years time, 3 years time, then maybe this will not age that well. But I think based on the assumption that generally when we see Genshin Impact's patches as well, they do tend to rerun characters unless you are Eula and they don't rerun you at all. But by and large, they do tend to rerun characters within a year at most, usually. So I do think that Luocha will see a rerun, and getting Silverwolf now is the best value for your account in terms of her effectiveness. And later on, when the sandpaper runs a bit less rough, you can of course pick up the Swiss Army knife to tackle what the game has for you. So those are my honest thoughts. If you want more of such content as well, do like and subscribe for more of such future content. I've done team composition videos for both of these characters, so if you're trying to like plan how to build a team around them, do check out either of these videos depending on which one you're interested in as well. Leave a nice comment. See you in the next video.